Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about environmental monitoring. I'm Jane Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in Carmarthenshire.
And I'm Kloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
Hello everyone, and today we've got a special guest host.
Who could it be?
You can never guess. You can never guess. I have to stop singing the intros. It's so awful. I'm so sorry. Please introduce yourself.
Well, back by no popular request is Jane Henderson.
Except our popular request, and we're in charge, so.
I'm just available at very late notice. And I teach conservation at Cardiff University, and I also do quite a lot of training with preventive conservation staff.
There was this weird bit where I was like, oh, surely we've done environmental monitoring, and Kloe was like, no.
That seems like a thing that we would do.
Yeah.
I think what we have done are things that bring in environmental monitoring and environmental controls. So we've done the sustainability one, jumps to mind, because we were talking quite a lot about, if you haven't listened to it, I don't know, some link in the show notes, ?
Listen to it, not right now, but after this.
Not right now. I think we were talking about things that can be done to, lower the amount of electricity you use by essentially doing a soft touch approach on your environmental controls. But this is how to tell what your soft touch approach on your environmental controls is doing.
Yes, and we've talked about things like building your own loggers and stuff like that, right? So we have kind of talked around environmental monitoring, but we've not actually had it as a topic, which I think is the bit that confused me, because I was like, really?
And who better to talk about it with than the queen of preventative conservation, her very self.
I've always fancied Tsarina of preventive conservation, if that's possible.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, I'll write that down.
I think almost better clothes, more flouncing.
Well, that's how I remember you from Cardiff, actually, because I don't think that your lab coat was particularly flouncy, but it was a little bit more flouncy than everybody else's. So when you swished around corners, for example, there was a certain amount of flounce.
I mean, is that just because ours were still really stiff from not being washed enough?
Picking up the one that nobody else would wear, and it was the biggest one.
Yeah, that'd be it. Yuck. Wash your lab coats, everybody.
So, environmental monitoring. I think you did quite a lot when you talked about Raspberry Pis.
Yeah.
So we did one. We've done one on Arduinos and one on Raspberry Pi, and ultimately both of them we were kind of talking about. Well, you could build your own logger if you really wanted to.
I will go for the not building my own option. Closest I've got to that side of things is my tech partner has offered to build me a warning light for when my museum system has been automatically turned off by some computer tech issue, which happens every so often. And that's the closest I've got to get somebody else to make something for me that isn't even a logger. I
think all preventive conservation staff should have like a helmet with an amber rotating beacon on the top that goes off when they go out of limit.
Yes! That would be amazing.
We'd widen our limits a little bit because the amber rotating beacon would be kind of like a disincentive for overly tight targets.
I love that. Some sort of massive overkill to any warning system.
But it does get us onto that, how quickly we get into stressing over tiny changes in the numbers. And I think environmental monitoring ends up there so quick. If it's all going horribly wrong, you kind of stop monitoring because you don't want to know. And if it's all going well, you sort of almost get to that point where you kind of you're playing for the flat line. You're sort of so driven that you just want like perfect graphs.
I've never had perfect graphs.
I think I like the idea, the concept of perfect graphs, but I'm so, even in a modern building, which I am in, I've never had perfect graphs in my life. And so I just go, okay, well, nothing's flashing at me, so we're probably all right.
I'm just happy if it's not leaking. I'm just happy if it's even vaguely within the parameters. I'm happy with that, to be honest.
What makes you happy in environmental monitoring? That's really what people should spend more time thinking about. What actually makes you happy in this situation? And set your flashing lights for that.
What makes you happy in environmental monitoring, Jane?
Oh, I guess proportionality. Like the amount of effort you put into it actually generates the amount of benefit that you get out of it. So, I quite like colleague who said to me, I don't monitor in here because there's nothing I can do about it.
Oh, yeah. That's the most you response I've ever heard, and I absolutely agree.
So he was like, let it go. But then you've got other people who might, I don't know, you might have put in a huge amount of expensive kit or whatever in. You put your loggers in and buy a lot of money on loggers, and then nobody looks at them. Or you look at them 6 monthly and then write a report and send it to management, who look at it in 3 months' time. And then someone says, oh, by the way, for the last 9 months, your £1 million piece of equipment has been destroying your collections.
Oh, God.
So it's totally disproportionate the other way. And so it's either way annoys me.
I was sitting in on this webinar. I think I liked that it opened with that gradually collections care professionals have kind of trained people to be data hoarders. Like, you should monitor your environment. We've gotten to the point now where people know that. And then they just hoard data and then they never look at it or do anything with it. And they're terrified of it. And it just sits there.
I feel like we could do a little bit of that song, Data. What is it good? It's not for nothing, but you've got to use it. And there's quite a lot of surveys. We've done in Wales a Spotlight survey for Welsh Government, and there's been other surveys, the British Library did one. And there is quite a lot of evidence of the gap between people who collect the data and the people who interpret their data. That really does freak me out. Would you like to hear what's worse?
Yes, please.
What's worse is having a thermohygrograph. This is because I'm very old. People used to have thermohygrographs when I was...
I love them.
I think they're beautiful. But going to see someone whose thermohygrograph isn't working, and I went to see them and their thermohygrograph wasn't working, and it wasn't working because it was in a box in a cupboard with no batteries in it in the office, and they wondered why it wasn't controlling the environment in the galleries.
Oh, that's a misunderstanding and a half.
Wow.
Well, I think I can help you with that.
I love it when there's a simple solution. Switch it on.
Let's take it out the box and let's lower our expectations what it's going to be able to do.
Do you think we're at the stage of technological changes where we now have to explain what a thermohygrograph is? Do you think?
Well, we'll link to that. They are beautiful pieces of equipment, by the way.
You still see some of them around and about. They've got a couple of arms drawing lines onto chart paper. And often, the chart paper's gone around for a couple of years. So you've got quite an impressive sort of mountain horizon.
Yeah. Which is sort of beautiful, but also like, why did no one change the paper?
I mean, I do have a thermohygrograph in my store that does look like that. But what it's really telling me is it's a confirmation that the environment doesn't change very much. And if there's a sort of outlying line, then I know there's a problem. I just don't know when it occurred.
So in terms of how the tech has changed, you've got that thermohygrograph, which people used to leave running or forgot to put the batteries in or didn't change the pens. And that's kind of been replaced now with the digital ones that are sending data to your computer that you're then either not opening or you're not downloading, or worse, you're kind of not processing. So you've got strings and strings of data, but it's just kind of sitting there. And I think it's kind of less visible than the thermohygrograph that's been neglected, but it's still bravely giving us little wiggly lines.
All on its own.
To the little logger that sits there, sort of almost, depending which logger you have, they can almost like disappear into things, can't they?
They definitely can. I mean, I worked somewhere, right, where basically they knew they used to have an environmental monitoring system.
Oh, wow.
And but in a very kind of once upon a time, we used to collect the data. And I was like, oh, okay, where is this going to go? And basically they were saying, well, we stopped paying them. We don't have any of the software anymore because we've all upgraded our computers since. No idea where that's gone. Okay. And they were like, well, the equipment will still be around. And I was like, okay, where? And they were like, everywhere maybe, and it's just because they were so incredibly beige that they just blended perfectly into the background, which in some ways is great because it's not distracting to look at the case, but it meant that they'd been finding them for years and kind of they open a case and go, oh, here's another one, and I just love these sort of neglected little soldiers who are just standing there going, oh, nothing's happening, and it's just like, oh, that's so adorable. So yes, they can be incredibly beige.
Neglected soldiers. Well, there's a small amount of guilt here because I'm resonating quite strongly with everything you're saying in a bad way. Firstly, I do use my data, but mainly to check that nothing's going wrong, to check that the computer is still asking for the data, which sometimes it doesn't do because I'm pursing my lips at it. And then I also use it when a lending body says, what are your environmental conditions like? And then I will produce the data for them and go, oh, Jesus, I hope this isn't too embarrassing to look at. And, oh, no, there's a huge gap where the system stopped the data thing from collecting data. Oh, no. Which happened, particularly sorry about this because it happened whilst I was on furlough and I couldn't go into the building, so I couldn't fix the thing. And so I had to get onto the remote viewer thing, and that was broken too because I hadn't done something because I was on furlough, and it was a nightmare. Confession number one is that's how I use my data for monitoring, honestly monitoring, but also here is the thing to external bodies. The other thing is that yesterday, my environmental monitoring system is, I love it, and it's provided by Meaco, and I'm going to be talking to them later in the show in a little interview. So they're turning up on Thursday. So yesterday I had to voyage around my museum, mostly in the dark, with a stepladder and a box of monitors, collecting them together so that they could all be sorted out.
It sounds like you're some sort of reverse burglar.
Yeah. So my manager's on maternity leave, so I have not done this before because it's on her computer, it was her thing, and this is part of the handover. So I was just searching around these dark galleries and these like ridiculous sort of cubbyhole spaces, and they're incredibly difficult to find. It took me 4 hours. 4 hours. There are 11.
Complete confession. At some point when there was an exhibition changeover somewhere I worked, one of the loggers got misplaced and we had no idea where it was. All I could see was that it was sending approximately the same data as before, but a bit wigglier. So I thought, it's not in the case anymore, but it's probably in the gallery because it doesn't really match any of the other graphs. So I don't think it's any of these locations.
Oh my God.
But we just could not find the thing, right? And this was like an ongoing saga for like 2 years. It was so silly. And it wasn't until like a complete refurb of that gallery when they'd gotten some like really strong men and some lifting equipment in to shift one of the cases that they realized it was wedged behind the case. Somehow it had gotten thrown on top when something was being taken out, and then it had got nudged off, and it had just been between the case and the wall for like 2 years.
Did you lie in bed awake at night worrying about what this poor little logger was going through?
Mostly when it was embarrassingly time for calibration time, and I was just like, and there's one missing.
Yeah.
So we know when the collections care conservators look down the back of their sofas, they're not looking for 20 pences, they're looking for their loggers.
Yes. In spirit, if nothing else.
Definitely.
So obviously you can get the ones that are doing the job and sending you the data, and that is lovely if you can afford it.
It's very pricey though, so yeah.
Well, I think if you sort of cost it all in, it doesn't take long for it to be better value. If you're going to do, I don't know, a dozen points of monitoring, like Kloe said, it takes a long time to go collect all those in. And if you start to cost that, you know, if you can get a system, if your IT department will allow you to have a system that will send live data, it's going to be more pandemic proof, isn't it? In the, you know, you will hopefully be able to tie in from home. But that's been a really interesting thing from emergency preparedness, hasn't it? Who can check into their systems from home?
In some places it can be controversial, just so you're getting the software and you're getting all these loggers and they all have to talk to each other and they have a server and all of that. And you need all of that signed off. And then you need to decide how many licenses you're willing to pay for people to be able to see the data and how they see the data. Can they see it from home, or can they only see it if they're physically plugged in to the building? And which one is more helpful, honestly, etc., etc., etc. And usually there is a big price difference between these different, shall we say, options. As someone who has, you know, tried to negotiate the waters of like, what sort of system do we need? God, it's a minefield sometimes when you get IT departments involved.
But don't you think it's kind of a tiny bit on the not very nice side of things? I mean, obviously you pay more for the more loggers you have and you pay more for the more data you store. But for the number of access points, it does feel like, hang on a minute, that's our data that we've bought the equipment to collect.
Oh, yeah.
And now we've got to pay for us to see it. It always makes me a bit uncomfortable, that.
Definitely. There are interesting ways of squeezing money out of people, definitely. And they do vary slightly between not only countries, but manufacturers and systems as well, which is interesting. Some people are more cloud-based now, and other people are still very kind of, this is a server and it exists only in this space. So if the building burns down, so does your data. And some things are a bit more old-fashioned digital, and some things are a bit more cloud-based. But then a lot of the time, with cloud-based things, it's a case of, okay, so you need a steady internet connection and it doesn't work for everyone. And sometimes it can be a thing of, okay, well, you have to keep paying them to have access to your data, etc. So there's so many ways of milking money from people with these things.
Are all companies the same in that respect? No.
No.
Ooh, we have a head shake.
No, they aren't. There's a fair bit of variety, and there are some more, perhaps fair solutions than others.
There's a few companies like Hobo, which are really popular in Australia that I haven't really worked with, which is me declaring that by not talking about them, it's not because they're one thing or the other, it's because I haven't sort of dealt with them on a day-to-day basis. But I think there are ethical practices, and there are also kind of purchasing buying power stuff that, once you start logging with a particular system, there is an attempt to lock you in, isn't there? It's like the old Android Mac.
Yeah.
Thing, isn't it? Once you've got your charger, then your computer, you want to speak to your phone, and the next thing you know, you've gone from buying your kid an iPhone to replacing every piece of computerware in the house so that you can all interoperable. But I think that kind of locked in. Some of the companies I think might push that a little bit harder in terms of that your data's on their software, and then what's the maintenance cost? Because when I used to do museum advice back in the day, I used to explain that you did have to maintain your system, paying to get the calibration done. Most people can't do their calibration in-house, and it's critical. So having the annual, which I guess is what you've got in a couple of days' time, an annual refresh, that's somebody coming down a couple of days, what with travel and upgrading and taking things away and batteries. And that's really worth it in the same way that you would pay for your car to be serviced.
That's how I think of it as well. Come and sort it all out for me and then answer the inevitable questions that I've got because I've forgotten what they said last time.
But separating that then from locked-in costs where you're just kind of like Jenny said, paying to get access to your own data.
I mean, we do have to remember that, these are businesses. They are trying to keep their customers, sometimes by any means, because they are trying to continue to make money off you. But, it sucks to buy an expensive system and then just have to keep giving money to them. I mean, that does suck, right? Like, that's not just me being an arsehole, right? That sucks.
Well, I think that's the problem, is because you've also got to explain to people why you've got to pay for the maintenance and the calibration and stuff. So that was in the past, decades and decades ago when I started all this, it was really selling the fact that you had to pay the maintenance money because you would get better data. But I think it's kind of slid now into really saying to people to look at what the ongoing operating costs are and to really, I guess, do that calculation about the value of them to them. And
what else is offered by the company in terms of like your yearly service and stuff and support costs and stuff.
And how they talk to you. If you call them up and say, oh, this is light flashing, or there's no light flashing, how do I get it to go back on, or something like that? I'm wearing this hat and this amber beading. You kind of want them to put you through to someone who doesn't mock you, don't you? Who will talk you through in the kindest of ways. Because you don't want to be embarrassed that I don't really have to use this equipment. So I think that's something to look for in a company as well, is how they talk to you if you're a bit technologically challenged.
Exactly.
But some other people want to call up the company and talk about how they pivot tables and, I can't even think, but you know what I mean.
Something technical.
Yeah, that wasn't very technical, was it? But you know what I mean?
Well,
I mean, I remember when I first heard about exporting the data from the system into Excel, I was quite impressed. That's going back a long way. But, you might be exporting it into the e-climate notebook or something like that, or, doing other calculations, preservation calculator stuff. So you might kind of like someone who can talk a higher level with you, which, again, it's not necessarily that one company has all of that, but some tend to lean one way and some tend to lean the other, I find, in terms of talking the talk and talking down at you. Somewhere in between is, or able to do both, I guess, is what you're really looking for, isn't it?
Yeah, ideally. And ideally kind of knows you well enough by the nervousness in your voice as you phone them to be able to respond with the correct one.
So I've only really used the sort of data management and analysis software, I suppose, that's provided by my software. I've not messed around with Excel in that respect. So do either of you fancy tech people fancy talking to us about how and why and what is achieved and what is required?
I mean, right. So I guess I've as a
no is fine as well.
What I was going to say was, as an emerging conservator, I very much used whatever was supplied, if you see what I mean. Like whatever was on hand. And sometimes, you know, an institution might be well grandfathered in on like one particular type of software, and these are the loggers they have, and this is the software that you've got, and you've got to kind of pull the data from it and use the graph that it produces. And like some people are very rigorous about how they want things done, and that's absolutely fine. I feel like a lot of my early work was trying to make sense of that sort of thing rather than pull anything out and play with it in Excel. And then from there, I feel like it's been a mixture of kind of both, where some things have required more Excel-based approaches and other things have been, okay, cool, the software can handle this, it's fine. But it depends on what you're trying to achieve with your data as well. So, you know, for some things, I would say I'm a very basic Excel user, and a lot of what I've used Excel for is when I've had to do manual logging, you know, like I've had to go around and read little displays on little sensors, not get the fancy data sent to, you know, whatever server or cloud. And instead I've had to actually manually put it into a spreadsheet and then, okay, well now I would like this to become a graph, and I would like it to tell me about the different kind of environmental swings I've got in these sorts of different parameters and all that stuff, right? That's not super complicated. So, you know, people do amazing things with Excel, and I'm not one of them. I think I went a bit more off the deep end with the light logging at one point, because
of course, yes,
I went proper mental with that and color-coded stuff, and it was very involved. It looked beautiful, but also it took a lot of time. You know, sometimes you got to look at how much work you're maybe putting into something as well, and if it's actually worth all that effort, or if someone really just wants to know, is it just too bright in here? Yes or no? Honestly, sometimes people just want that.
That's right, and that's like getting your value for money, and that goes back to, you know, what's frustrating, what's good. What's good is getting the right amount of thing out of your system. And I think if you've got like an hodgepodge of different loggers with different companies, then exporting them all to Excel so you can at least get them to overlay and stuff, so you can sort of say this room is worse than this room or whatever. That's quite handy. If you've got like a basic logger, they normally have a basic software, and as long as you can not just have the default setup, which is a bit annoying, then you could probably do what you want. The trouble with most of the defaults is that they default to stretch the graph as big as it can be, so you can see all the wiggly lines, but that then means you have a different scale depending on what's been going on in the gallery. So if you can't fiddle with the default at all, what will happen is you will always get the kind of most stretched version of the graph, and what you don't really want is a graph that's from 47.3 to 56.2 and look like a Himalayan, you know, peak weight. Actually, it's like absolutely fine, but because the graph is trying to like really make you happy by giving you wiggles, it's kind of doing that. But then the next month it goes from like 20% relative humidity to 90%, and it looks exactly the same in terms of the wiggly lines. So if you can't fiddle with that, I would sort of go outside, because you want to be able to fiddle with the colours. You want to be able to put a label on it saying, "Oh, wash the floor," or "roof blew off," or you know, "snowed for 3 weeks." So that at least when you look and say, "Why was it 0% humidity?" It's like snowed for 3 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
The only moisture was coming off our hot chocolate.
Oh, it's 80% because the river came to visit. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. And sometimes even lenders, because Kloe was mentioning how often lenders are saying that they need to see your gallery for the last year. Sometimes, and I would say more and more so, if you've got a good explanation that's not a continuous or an embedded problem, if you've got a good explanation of why something happened in that particular month last year, they will still lend it to you if you can sort of promise them that event won't happen again, you know. So you cleaners decided to wash the floor with water, or we invited 400 school children to a fun with aqua activity week.
I mean, I've literally put that sort of thing in like these sorts of reports where, you know, because sometimes, you know, like a collections manager or something will panic and go, oh my God, they're asking for our data. Could you pull something together? And usually, I would, and it would be a graph, and it would be, maybe wigglier than we thought it would be. But we would have an idea of, okay, well, it's on that date. Well, we can explain that by this. And I would put it into context. And I would always reassure them that it's the context that matters, right? It's obviously a one-off. And no, we're not gonna do that bit again. We're not gonna have a slip and slide indoors again. It was a bad idea the first time.
I like the slip and slide. It's just you don't want it to go with your watercolor impressionist in the gallery. Watercolors and water fun at the Museum of High Risk. So yeah, I like the ones that you can do that much. Change the color, change the scale, put labels on. If you can do that, then I think for a lot of basic applications, that's as much as people will want to do. Some people want to look at the dew point. I kind of like that stuff because I'm on the nerd end of these things, but you don't need to get in at that level. That is not an entry level addiction. So if you've got like 6 different systems and they're not doing what you want, then export them to Excel. But there's also a couple of products that you can get that you can drop your data into, which I mentioned, and I guess Jenny will do show notes. And probably the biggest one is eClimate Notebook. So you can put from their loggers, you can have their software, or you can pay to use their system and put your data in. So this is where you got your CSV data. And most loggers will have a CSV export, and then you can sort of pop them into another place and do like more fun. With the eClimate Notebook, you have to pay a subscription, the more you put in and that sort of thing. But it's pretty dependent on how big you are. It doesn't just have a big cliff.
It scales, basically. Yeah, okay.
So it doesn't start as hugely expensive if you look at it in the scheme of things. But the other one that's come on to the market, I've just been seeing, is Conserv. Have you seen them? But a part of their new company is that they're allowing you to use their software with your data.
So you kind of don't have to buy in.
Oh, I see.
And then they scale you up with like all these other things that you want. Like, would you like to have PIs? Yes, I do want PIs. But what they're offering you seems to me to be more functionality rather than more and more people can look at it. So it's kind of less like pay us more to see you on data and pay us more for us to do more cool things with your numbers. That's how I get it. Obviously, they haven't been around for long and they're not yet properly launched in Europe. So it is an experimental thing, but I think it's a really interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like maybe we're now getting to the point where we have more reasonable tools. Actually, we have talked to Conserv.
I'm Austin Senseman. I'm one of the founders of Conserv. And our mission is to bring better preventive conservation tools to the collections care space. There are lots of little everyday hassles that go into this work. And we've started with environmental monitoring as the first tool we're going to work on. We're building a platform that's a little bit bigger. We just launched an integrated pest management tool as well. And we'll work on other things. Our goal is not just to do monitoring, but to be a platform for preventive conservation, which is really exciting. No one's ever done this before.
Yeah.
Really. So, the number one question we get, because we're relatively new, and my team mostly doesn't have a collections care background. So probably the number one question we get from folks is, how did you get into this? Or why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Or tell me a little bit about your background. It's like, this seems kind of random. And
like how did this start? Like, how do you get into this if you're not already like one of the nerds?
Yeah. My background is in analytics, and I did consulting work in that area for many years. And that's really like going into an organization and saying it's possible to have data, but not have information. Nathan, my partner, he's an engineer. He builds hardware, he builds software, he can do a lot of different things well. And, we teamed up to find an interesting business to work on. And we looked at lots of different things. And, Nathan's mom happens to be an objects conservator.
Ooh.
And so at some point we're in a museum and she's showing us how they do monitoring. And we looked at lots of different things and nothing really grabbed our attention, but this did. We got introductions to folks in New York, and we went to New York and we visited lots of places that had plenty of resources and plenty of nice stuff. And we kind of saw the same thing everywhere. And people told us, we have the money to buy better things. We just don't really have better things to buy. And so that was kind of the beginning of the business. And that was the very beginning of 2019. So about 2 years ago.
Wow. So that's really cool that you started like by being introduced by a family member in a way to the museum world. That's super cool.
Right.
So what is it that you actually do at Conserv? So you're a let's say, collections care platform, but what does that mean?
Just to zoom in and talk about monitoring, because that's where we started, and that's still our core product. And so we went and talked to hundreds of people who just kind of work, and we asked them, what's working for you now? What's not working? And what we heard is that data collection is still kind of a hassle in most places. This is more true, I think, in the US, but in the US, there's really not a lot of wireless monitoring going on.
Okay.
And I would say even in Europe, most people still don't have wireless monitoring, but a significant plurality of people do.
Most of the big places do have wireless monitoring, but then it becomes a money issue. Of course, it usually is, isn't it? So it depends on how much budget you have to splash out on this sort of thing.
Yeah. And we looked at that, and that's what we heard from people, right? We don't have it because it's a money issue. And we came to the perspective that that's not true. And that wireless was a problem for people because it was largely based on Wi-Fi, which is just a really ill-suited technology for this. You're familiar with Wi-Fi. It doesn't really make it to the end of your house. And then you take a larger, more complicated building.
I was going to say, then you're in a historic building with thick stone walls, and then you'll never get signal ever.
Right. It just doesn't work. And so then you end up having to spend a lot of money like putting Wi-Fi coverage throughout the space. And like, why would you even put that in your storage space? No one's even in there. And you spend all that money and you get it set up, and then the batteries only last 3 months, and the Wi-Fi password changes and the whole thing stops working, and there's just a lot of problems with it. So that was really interesting. So we went out and found a technology called LoRaWAN, LoRaWAN, long range wide area network, and it's just a little different. It's long range, as the name sort of signifies, and the battery life is great. The trade-off is it only sends really small amounts of data, but for what we're doing, isn't that just fine? We're sending like 8 numbers every 10 or 15 minutes, and we're not trying to stream Netflix. Yeah, so we found a technology where you just sort of plug it in and it works, and you don't have to worry about Wi-Fi, you don't have to worry about any of that. And so that was like the first thing that we solved for people. Here's a relatively inexpensive thing, no IT department required. You just plug it in, it just works, and all of a sudden, all that time that you're walking around getting data out of these things, that just goes away completely. That was the beginning of the value proposition, right? Which is like, how much time are you spending doing that? And it turns out people aren't spending an enormous amount of time. It turns out that people just aren't doing it very often because
it's hassle.
It's a hassle. Yes, you might do it once a month. And then, you hear sort of inevitably, oh, look, we had an issue 2 weeks ago. There's no feedback loop to make progress, or there's not a quick feedback loop. So, but that's like just the first part, like that just, now people might have better data, but there's still this large question of what do you do with it? And so we quickly started working on analysis. If even people who had wireless, they still probably didn't have an analysis tool that was built for collection care, right? You sort of get these generic tools that people are trying to build a tool that works for museums, science labs, restaurants, pool maintenance companies, self-storage, right? Like it's got to work for everyone. It's a generic kind of tool. Yeah, so we thought, okay, well, and there's some examples of tools that do this. Like in the States, we have eClimate Notebook, which is from the Image Permanence Institute. But then outside of that, it's pretty sparse. And so we just went and sat down with people and said, how do you do your analysis? Basically, like, bring out your spreadsheets. Let us see.
Were people happy to do that, or were they a bit embarrassed?
Well, I mean, I've been like the spreadsheet therapist for many years anyway, so it's sort of my natural kind of like, no judgment here, like progress, not perfection. Like, Let's take a look. So from there, we started trying to build an experience that produces the things people want to see without a lot of fuss. So, simple stuff. I mean, some of this isn't terribly complicated, but it's like, I would like my RH to be between 50 and 70%, and I really don't want to fluctuate more than 10% in a 24-hour period. Okay, great. What percentage of the time are you within those levels? And just be able to look at it and say, oh, we were 75% compliant this month. It's really a balance between respecting the complexity of it, but creating some numbers that can be the drivers of conversations, because this work doesn't get solved alone. It's always a team sport. So that's what we tried to do there. And from there, it's like, collect the data, make it pretty straightforward to analyze. Are we doing well? Are we not? Are we improving? Are we not? And then the third thing was the ability to communicate it with people. So unlimited users on the platform, invite anybody, lots of different ways to share things with people.
Because that was the thing that we started talking about, is that you guys have a free platform, and we're all immediately like, oh my God, a free platform? That doesn't happen. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what we're doing, it's not altogether new, like in the larger world of software. We're sort of expressing a lot of trends of the last 20, 10, and 5 years, but just in this space. So like, it's increasingly common now. I mean, all my favorite software that I use, it has a free version, and it's not some watered down thing. It's like it's a pretty good free tool.
Yeah.
And then companies will stack much more valuable things on there that are paid versions. And we thought that just fit really well in this space. I mean, we're committed to access, and so increasing like high quality tools in people's hands and having a really great free version that exists.
It just gets you more uses, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but it also creates a really high bar for us. If we're going to ask someone to pay for something, it's got to be something really cool that really drives a lot of value to them.
The basic thing is free, and then you can get things that you pay for, essentially.
The basic thing is totally free. And like the way we do it is, I think, unique as well. Like, we've changed the model a little bit where the software is free, but you can't just get access to it anymore. We're going to like spend 30 minutes onboarding you onto the software, which is like, this is crazy. How do you guys have the time or make money doing this? And what we found is there's some things that if you do up front consistently, just one time, you get a lot more value later, right? Like if you really explicitly set the different levels for your spaces, right? Like I want the RH to kind of be here, the temperature here for the galleries, and my storage like this. You set your spaces up right, like here are the different spaces in my collection, and make sure your address is in there for your location, so the weather data comes in. If you do all these things at the beginning, you get a lot more value out of the tool, and so we help people do that. It's like very much geared toward tailoring it to you so you can get the full value of it. Now, and of course, we're also going to ask you, are you interested in buying environmental monitoring equipment in the next 6 to 12 months? I mean, there's a business angle to it.
Yeah,
sure. And if the answer is no, that's fine. Like, we're going to treat you just like we treat everyone else.
Yeah.
But another aspect of this is like people aren't going and buying monitoring equipment necessarily every year. Maybe you just bought a bunch of stuff last year, and maybe you'll buy again in 3, 4, 5 years. And so part of the free model too is we want to be adding value to you, whether you're a paying customer or not. And when the time comes and you think, I need some monitoring, and we have this good relationship built around us giving a lot, that we hope people think of us.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, so you're based in North America. Do you have customers in Europe, or are you planning to have customers in Europe or the rest of the world?
We just got our CE certification done about a month ago.
Ooh.
And we shipped our first European orders a couple weeks ago. So that's going well, and those are all we're sort of framing those as pilots. We want to make sure things work right in Europe. The frequencies are different, some things are different.
Sure, yeah.
We've got all set up for GDPR. Like, is that working the way we want it to?
Yeah.
And Anna Martens, who's on our advisory board, she was a conservation scientist at MoMA for many years, and she's retired, and she moved to the Netherlands at the beginning of the year. So she's in Europe as well, and she's helping set up these early relationships. So for folks that are listening in Europe, absolutely could connect you with Anna. It's great because she understands our technology really well, and she's been doing this work for a few decades. Like, I love having these people on our team. It helps us build a better product, and it also helps us just connect with people and serve people better.
So what else is in the pipeline? You mentioned pest monitoring.
So this is definitely a version of show me your spreadsheets, right?
Yes.
Right? Because with IPM, everyone's doing this on a spreadsheet. Not everyone, but essentially everyone. So we thought, wow, if there are spreadsheets, then there's software to be built. It's sort of the way to think about it.
Mm.
So we just launched this in the platform at the beginning of April.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very early version. The idea is to bring everything into one place so that it's easy to do this workflow, which is like go and collect observations. So that could either be a picture of a trap or hey, I saw this thing. And then to flow into identifying things. So looking at a trap and saying, there are 3 carpet beetles on here and this. We've partnered with museumpest.net in the US, and they have a big pest database.
Yeah.
And we've brought that database into the platform. So it's sitting there right next to you as you're trying to do this work. So a big picture of the trap, this highly detailed pest database, and you can sort of piece it together there. And I don't know if you talked about this with Jane, but on the analytics side, we were inspired by her and Christian's pest occurrence index.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing.
And so on the analytics side, we've brought the pest occurrence index in there. And again, this sort of sits on this same free tool. And we haven't taken this next logical step yet, but you'll see it later this year, which is to be able to look at your pest analytics and environment analytics together, clearly like the environment in a space. Yeah, so all these things begin to sort of build on each other.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Oh, that's super cool. I look forward to that. That's great.
When we think about environmental monitoring, we're trying to reframe it a little bit. I think about like lowercase e and capital E. And for me, like capital E is like just the total environment. It's more like the agents of deterioration. So it's not just temperature and RH, but your pests are part of your environment.
Yeah.
You know, like the cleaning routine, part of the environment. And so I think that's probably the transition we're making is from that lowercase e, which is like temperature, relative humidity, light, into the uppercase e, which is sort of the larger set of challenges.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good way of thinking about it. Where can people find you if they want to go and find out more?
We've really simplified this recently. So our website, Conserv, by the way, Conserv, no E on the end. So it's conserv.io, and people are like, what's up with the .io? Well, it's hard to get a .com email address, okay?
Yeah, it is.
It's 2021. Everyone's squatting on all of them. So conserv.io. If you go to our website, all over the website on the various pages, there's a simple field where you can put in your email address and say, get started. And that kicks off everything with us. If you go to that, there's a quick survey. We just want to learn a little bit more about your collection. What are you doing now? What's working? What's not working? Mm-hmm. And from there, someone from our team is going to find some time to onboard you onto the free tools.
Well, do check it out if you think you're in need of something like this. And thank you so much for talking to us today.
So talking about software, this is one of those, I'm afraid, dead end Kloe inputs that I have looked at or tried to start looking at a mobile apps that you can do this stuff from. And I didn't get very far because then I got annoyed when I realized that I do get very annoyed when somebody's job requires them to have a smartphone, and which museum provides a smartphone for their people to use. So I didn't go any further with that, but I know that Hanwell have one. I mean, this is very one-sided because I didn't do it properly. Lapka, I think, but I don't think that that's a museum one. That's just Lapka turns your iPhone into an environmental monitoring station, and it's all very wood effect and fancy, and seems to be talking about radiation levels and things like that. So I don't have any extra information because I haven't looked at it properly, but it seems that there's quite a lot of kind of input into what you can do on your phone and stuff. And I actually started looking into this because I wanted to know whether there are new apps that allows your phone to be an environmental monitor, because I've used them before in the past, but like 6 years ago or something, and the technology was rubbish and it just didn't work. I tried to calibrate it, or at least, you know, at the very least work out how wrong it was, and even that didn't sort of show me anything. So that's something else I want to look into, because then you can have something that you can carry around with you in maybe a large site, and so you don't have to always go and have a look at your environmental monitoring system in order to see if there's a problem. If you walk into a space and go, it feels damp in here, which I've definitely done.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, good point. And I would love for smart technology to, be advanced and reliable enough for that to be a thing. Because I love spot checking. But the spot checking devices, when they're a standalone device, they are horrendously expensive. Like eye-wateringly expensive, because I want one that does everything. Like I want the one that does the lux and the UV, and it's like so much money. It's like nearly £600 without that, and it's just like,
oh wow,
it just makes me sad.
I didn't know how much they cost, actually. All I knew was the sort of air of absolute reverence. So we're on video chat with Jane at the moment, which is rare because we normally stop it, but we just like chatting so much. She's now got the monitor out that I was just about to say turned up with a sort of air of reverence in one of my past jobs. And, people opened the box and the box was all soft inside. And it's like, ooh, yes, that's the very box, Jane. It's slightly squishy. There's a closed cell foam in there. It's very nice.
And that's what £600 gets you.
Do you want to explain the two gadgets that you were holding up just then, Jane?
Jenny was saying that they cost a lot, but I would, because I've always advised pretty much in Wales, I mean, I've done other places as well, but I would say if you are getting into environmental logging, the first thing you do if you're really low budget is those little white ones that are like that you would get for a baby's bedroom or for a greenhouse.
Yeah.
My living room. I have several of those.
30, 40 UK pounds. And you just buy them and you don't expect them to last. But if you go anything up from that, so as soon as you get a decent little logger that's about 100 UK pounds, then your calibration and your accuracy is quite important because you're going to buy 3 of them and then you're running them for a year and collecting all the data. So you really do need to know if they're any good. And the easier way to check if a £100 one is any good is to have one of the £300 or £400 ones that come with a calibration kit. That's my pitch. So you have to get the ones with a decent sensor. You know, the one where you look inside and you can see that little silicon chip when you peer into you can see it sideways there. You would need to know whether you're going to go to a super cold when you chose, because, some of them are a bit temperature sensitive. And then these ones you can calibrate. And I would really invest them as soon as you're beyond 3 greenhouse ones. As soon as you get beyond that, I would say get the money, even if you have to share it between like 2 or 3 museums, and get one of the ones with the calibration kit. Spend the money and do it, because we're going to play a game. What's older, my logger or you?
Ooh.
So should we describe what this logger looks like? This is not the one that came out of the fancy box with the clippy clip.
This one looks like a walkie-talkie.
It looks like a 1980s mobile phone. Oh, it's come out of a very large case. The clips probably sound really good on that one as well. The antenna is, it folds away. I love it. The antenna is as long as the unit. And it's got a little screen. I'm going to call it early 90s tech grey. Yeah,
I would agree with that entirely. I do have an older one, but it's in my locked down office. So this was the oldest one I could find in the house. So I guess we have to ask all the listeners, what year were they born? And was it before or after 1995?
1995!
Got this in 94, but I didn't calibrate till 95.
I mean, wow.
It's so of its time, isn't it?
You can kind of see that museum tech was it wasn't a priority for it to look sexy yet.
But it's still, I check this all the time. It's still really accurate. I got this in a job. I left that job. It stayed in the job. That organization folded. The building was evacuated. I drove up there on the last day that they were open, picked it back up again.
It's a love story. It's like Jane Eyre.
I've got all sorts of things in that. Took them back because they didn't want them because they were going in the skip, and who wants reuse? And I've been using them. I've let students use them. I've taken them on courses, and it's still accurate. So I think, Jenny, it's earned its £200 or £400 in UK today money.
Nice work. Don't you? I like that.
I think so. For a true conservation romance, definitely.
So I think it is worth spending the money with the little ones, the little ones. I would say you use them until they start working, and then you probably chuck them out. So you might feel, this is where you get into sustainability and your sustainability purchasing discussions. Do you get fewer, better that you hope will last longer? Do you get the cheaper ones that you can get a good coverage and then maybe upgrade over every year till you've got a decent set, but knowing that they're basically disposable electrics?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So we're into principles of data collection now.
You have never looked happier to say those words.
See, it's always the same with me. You've got to set your research question. So what is it you want to know? So really, ideally, you don't arrive at the museum and they say, here's the horrible set of mismatched loggers that you've inherited. And don't disturb the bats in the gallery. And the river running through the store is protected. Then, if you don't have that, if you actually have a choice, then you should sit down and think, well, what do I actually want to know? So do it like, when you were a student, you had to write an essay or you did a plan or you did a project, you actually should sit down and do that. Because if you sit down and say, what I want to know is has the door been left open? But if what you just want to know is the chair in there okay, then you just put it near the chair. So, and a lot of the time we just kind of want reassurance, seeking the happiness. We just want to know that thing's probably all right. So if we know roughly what all right is and what all right isn't, then we just need a logger that's good enough to do that for us. So if it's a big, massive piece of furniture and you're not able to get on site very often and it's got big stone walls, so it's really rubbish at sending you telemetric messages, then you just want something diddy that you can tuck in underneath it, go and check it, Then it's going to be size, it's going to be the massive storage of data, that sort of thing that you're going to do. And this is where having a software notebook system that you can pull in different loggers might become attractive. A lot of us people have just got like just one museum or a museum and a store, and they can roughly put all the same loggers in. And the big decision is, do you have like a yellow one that you can find or a discrete one that you can't? The ones I like about the yellow ones is they've got a screw hole so you can screw them into things. Trouble with the white ones is how stealable they are, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is something that I was considering as I was annoyed with myself lugging around my massive stepladder around with me yesterday. I was thinking, well, at least no one else can reach these if I can't reach these.
Okay, so you guys put them high up. That's kind of what I'm taking away.
Yeah, these are high up, but then I think that's because one of the reasons that we look carefully is because we have quite a lot of open display textiles, and the top of them is pretty high, usually. Like 5 meters, 6 meters high. So putting a logger in the middle of that is still out of reach, thankfully.
Yeah, that's fair. That's interesting because I think I ended up kind of doing some that were out in galleries, and then they were kind of on top of doorways, so that they were kind of so high up that you would have to really, really try, and you would get caught before you managed to succeed.
People don't tend to look in places like that, though.
Yeah, exactly, right. So,
but it also means that people visiting the galleries who are also collections care staff can peer at the numbers, if there's visible numbers, and then go, oh, it's nice in here. It's my favourite thing to do in museums now.
And friends and family. I mean, as soon as lockdown ends and we can get back in, we'll be able to drag our children and partners and parents and say, look.
And point at the
that.
monitors.
Yeah. What are you looking at the painting for? There's a logo.
I guess I fall into the trap of like basic environmental monitoring. To me, it's like, okay, so I'm worried about relative humidity and I'm worried about temperature. And as a bonus additional layer to the onion, I'll go like, oh, I worry about UV and I worry about lux levels.
I'm particularly concerned about lux levels because that's the thing that I can change.
And then beyond that, it's just like, here be dragons when people start thinking about pollutants and I don't know. It's just...
Don't you do vibration monitoring then, Jenny?
No, never have. People have asked me about it and I'm like, I know literally nothing about vibration monitoring, and I feel bad because there are bound to be people who are very knowledgeable about it, but no, never have.
I think that I've been told, and I've been involved in somebody else doing vibration monitoring, and so it is in my mind when I look at an object that moves sometimes. I think, what can I do about that? As for gallery pollutants, I've been told that we have filters in our air system, and I know that they are changed.
One of the things that came up in the webinar was basically that people have a lot of perceptions of like basically constraints for their environmental monitoring. So it's stuff like, well, there's no point in checking because I can't do anything about it. Like that's a common mindset that people really need to get out of. It kind of intersects with that, where it's stuff that I fret about that I think I can change versus things I fret about that I think I can't change. Which, because you mentioned that you can change light levels, Kloe, which is,
yes,
in and of itself interesting. So that's something that you feel like you can control. It's something you can worry about and you can control.
I love my lights. It's one of the things that I love very much about my galleries.
As for maybe this, for me, falls into the territory of, okay, maybe I should worry about pollutants, but what can I do about it anyway? But I wonder if there's a certain amount of, like, it's more about the psychology of this than the actual science.
What do you think, Jane? You're nodding in a I'm ready for this kind of way.
No, well, it's like the light is really satisfying, isn't it? Because it's like doing a diet without having to forego crisps, because...
Oh, yeah.
You can turn down the light level, feel very satisfied that you've, saved and generally got all the sort of good feedback emotionally that you would get from going for a run, but all you've actually done is just tip the lamp. So that's a really positive thing. And then you can
Oh, yeah.
sort of manage your humidity. You can normally control it and you can sort of troubleshoot and forensically investigate events. And that's quite exciting. But I think we are going to do better with pollution because, again, COVID, because of ventilation rates. Because we're going to go back to looking at ventilation rates. A lot of the safety people will start just saying, let's just ventilate more to be safe, And then we're going to be saying, well, no, because we want to reuse the air because we don't want to consume energy cleaning it and humidifying it. So I think then we will get into like how much ventilation do we need? And the best way to do that is with your carbon dioxide monitoring. So I think this is going to come back in as a thing so that we can sort of be juggling a little bit in terms of our energy use and our safety and our fresh air intake. So I think, if you've got a building management system, if you're paying money for filtration and things like that, probably you do want to know if you're paying for actually results that you're actually getting. And you probably also want to be able to dial up and dial down depending on the numbers of visitors based off sensors.
The reason that I always think of you as, apart from the fact that obviously this is your specialism, but I always think of you when I go into galleries and museums because there is an umbrella stand at the door. Do you want to explain the umbrella stand? Or
in terms of environmental control, there is a lot that you can do. But I always when I talk about it, want to start at the beginning, and that is with a doormat and an umbrella stand. Again, I can't help but talking about the fact I live in Wales and we are a country with no shortage of rain, unlike others. So we do have to, and in fact, Narberth Museum, which is very near where Jenny is, have an umbrella stand that I have photographs of for decades. And even when they moved, they took the umbrella stand with them. And then I sneaked in once when my kids were in a theme park nearby, and I sneaked into the museum to look around, and I was just trying to sneak around and look around like a museum on my own. And someone went, oh, you're Jane Henderson, come and see our umbrella stand.
Oh, I love it.
It's like, oh, my umbrella stand. I never go through a light. But I just love, the fact that you don't have to always spend money, that there are these things. And I think that's what we need to connect up a little bit. It goes back to your, why are we collecting the data? If what you're trying to do is get rid of the really damp spots and you find out it's on a rainy day, then you've just got to stop the rain from coming in. So, is that fixing the roof? Is that putting an umbrella stand in? People would like an umbrella stand. There's a culture, about like leaving your door closed, that you don't have to have the door wedged open, and you can have it, leave your umbrellas in the way in and things like that. We've got weather. We don't have to bring it inside. We can use traditional methods like doormats and closing the door. But we've kind of got into this weird thing of if the door's not propped open, then you can't be open sort of thing. Makes me so sad from a sustainability point of view. Not every country does the same, but
we have started, or at least in the last period of museum opening, we did start opening our doors, but leaving our doors open so people didn't have to touch door handles. And we did think this was one of those, like, we're going to have to compromise on this. Hopefully it won't be forever. But COVID times, and I suppose extra ventilation in that respect as well. But keeping the weather out and the environmental controls in is very much a mood.
Always tweet me pictures of umbrella stands from anywhere. I don't mind.
So this feels like a good time to listen to my interview with Michael from Meaco. Meaco is the provider of the environmental monitoring system that I use, and I definitely don't use it to the extent of its capabilities, but let's listen to what he has to say. Hi everyone, so I'm here with the provider of my environmental monitoring system, Meaco. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Michael Hall and I am the director and co-owner of Meaco Measurement and Control Limited.
Thank you so much for speaking to us.
You're welcome. It's only been 2 years.
I know, so this is actually the first face-to-face interview I've done for years now because of COVID. We're distanced and it's all very safe, but poor Michael's been waiting for the museum to be open for us to calibrate our system properly for it's been a year now, hasn't it? No, 2 years now. Yeah, it's been 2 years now. So thanks very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure. It's been a while. It's like, it's still going. That's fine.
Yeah, it's all right. I've been checking it.
Yeah,
it went down a bit, but that was our fault, not yours.
It's IT for you.
Yeah. My first question is, how did your work with Meaco begin? And do you want to tell us a bit about the company and how it started?
Okay, so this is not a very well-known fact. I kind of fell into the job in 2003. So I didn't start the company. There was a chap called Chris Michael who founded Meaco 1993. He basically came up with an environmental monitoring system, first radio telemetry environmental monitoring system way back then. But I just applied for a job. I was just after a sales job at the time. Started working for Chris as like a sales manager. 3 years later, he offered us museum side of his business. And so Samantha and I, she's the other co-owner, so we went to the pub, had a few beers to discuss, could we do this? We went back to Chris and said, yes, we'll do it. And at that point, we were down in Cranley in Surrey. And so we said yes. And then the September of that year, we took over the business and moved it up to Staffordshire. And so now we concentrate on environmental monitoring for museums, libraries, archives and stately homes. And that's all we concentrate on. We don't do we do it in industry, but it's museum focused. It's
Brilliant.
Great. Love it.
Brilliant. So what do you provide as Meaco?
We provide museums and libraries and archives the tools to monitor your environment, and then after that, once you know what your conditions are like, we can provide you with kit to help control your environment. Because we get lots of people ringing up saying, I need a humidifier or a dehumidifier, and then they suddenly realise, well, actually, I don't know if I need one of those because I've got no data to back it up. So one of our things is always do your monitoring first and see if you actually need any control equipment. So we provide data loggers, which are a nice, cheap and easy way to get into monitoring. We provide Wi-Fi loggers, and we provide our own radio telemetry system to monitor your environment. We cover a broad spectrum, so it could be from a national organisation down to a small volunteer-run organisation. We deal with everybody. And we like dealing with music people because they're really friendly and nice.
Thanks very much.
You're nicer customers than you are dealing with members of the public or industry. Much nicer.
Hear that, everyone? We're nice.
And preventive conservators are the best. There you go.
Let's all do preventive conservators do a hair flick.
Yeah.
Everybody, there we go. So that means also you provide the software and also the support. And as you are coming in today for us, you are calibrating and setting up and cleaning up and what you're doing.
Yes. So part of our...
You were brushing something when I came in.
So you had a bit of a leaky battery in one of your battery packs. And part of our service with our kit, our radio telemetry kit, is that we do provide a service plan, or you want to call it an extended warranty. It's similar to an extended warranty, where I will come in on an annual basis. I will do a calibration and adjustment. That's important, not just a calibration. So your sensors actually get adjusted so that they stay accurate, rather than just 10% out and they stay 10% out. That defeats the object. So you get a calibration, an adjustment, a service, repairs. If there's any updates to your software, you'll get your software updated. And that's all part of it. And you can, if you wanted to, contact us at midnight to say, how do I do this? That's fine, because we will respond.
So many cultural institutions, as you've already outlined, are sometimes working on very limited budgets. What would you suggest for the small organisations who are struggling with their environmental conditions?
Don't panic.
Oh, that's a good one.
Don't panic. Everybody is in the same boat. Everybody has their own environmental problems. Everybody has fluctuating humidity, fluctuating temperatures. It doesn't matter if you're a big national museum or a small volunteer organisation. Everybody's in the same boat. And I've seen the data, so I know. So there are places that you think, they should have perfect conditions. They're not. So everybody suffers from the same thing. First thing to do is if you start doing some monitoring. It's not expensive to get a data logger. They're like £99, and you can get a data logger that will actually prove to you what is happening in your environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you can have that as a graph that you can send to somebody and say, look, these are the conditions. Help. You've got Museum development officers, speak to them because you can normally get free kit from them. They can provide you with a data logger or some tools. I think Lindsay Jones is the MDO that I know up here. We've got a good team, good West Midlands development officers. They're a good team, so there's 4 of them. I think there's 4 of them, and they go out and they will help you sort your problems out. They'll get you monitoring kit for it, data loggers, handhelds, and just give you advice.
So I think when I spoke to you 2 years ago about how about interviewing on the C Word podcast, I thought of this because you said something interesting about a fish tank.
Yeah, I hate this word, pragmatic. I have 2 fish tanks in the office for calibration. And I think it's magnesium hydroxide or something in there. In those tanks to maintain a steady humidity of 53%. Only because the office environment the temperature is the same as the humidity. It's 22 degrees.
Right.
So it's really dry and it's not ideal for calibrating kit. So I have 2 fish tanks with this stuff in it and it maintains 53%. They're thereabouts. If I'm doing a calibration at a sensible humidity, everything goes in there and it gets calibrated, obviously against the reference instrument. I've upped my game a little bit as well.
Cool.
So I've got a big plastic Tupperware box where I can seal it, so I can make a good seal, so if you put soup in it, it's not going to come out.
Yeah.
And I've got, I think it's lithium chloride, so I can get the humidity down to 11%.
I see.
And then I've also, I can't remember what the other substances. I've got, it's up to 88%.
Oh, I see. Right, so you've got different environments.
So you've got different environments of known humidities. So if I'm doing a 3-point calibration, obviously to save me carrying around, because I do have a portable humidity chamber where I can generate different humidities. I'll use a hygroclip, like you've got here. I'll use one of those. Because they're really good at all humidities, they're really accurate. So that's my reference. They're my reference instruments, and then I can compare. I can basically do a calibration of the sensors at different humidities, and you get your 3-point calibration. So that's like an easy way of doing it.
Right. So I asked Jane in advance of our recording a couple of days ago what questions would she ask you, and she came up with loads of really good ones, and I've tried to select the ones that I think are the best for this. So her first question was, what's the most inaccurate you found a logger before calibrating? Please don't say one of mine.
No, you're all right. I won't say it's a logger. You know the big jumbo displays you can get?
Yes.
Those.
Right. Interesting.
Terrible. I mean, these things you can pick them up from B&Q, and we got some, and they just pretty much, we gave them away because they were bad. They're like 10% out.
Oh, I see.
And that's out of the packet.
Yeah.
It's not, they haven't been anywhere. You're like, oh my god, these are terrible. Can't use those because we try everything we try and sell or do is at least no more than plus minus 3%. And when you 10% out of the box, it's like, oh my god, what a pile of junk. And so I've seen those.
Okay.
So I do not trust them as far as I can throw. Loggers, I've seen over time. I've seen some maybe 15-year-old data loggers that are maybe 7%.
Okay.
So it's not too
bad. By comparison,
bad.
that's not too bad.
It's not too
really.
bad at all.
What's the longest you've ever found a logger left without power?
Okay, a logger, I've seen loggers that are probably, 5 years without power. I can go one better than that. I've seen a whole system. So this was 2 years ago. I'm not going to name names. Found the logging computer, turned it on, Windows 2000.
Wow. That's pretty good. That's a good one. That's a good one.
That was like, oh my god, it's Windows 2. And
vintage.
Yeah, it was a vintage system.
And it hadn't been working this whole time.
No, they didn't knew they had it.
I see.
They know they had sensors. They didn't know what it was for. So I'd gone over to do a survey, and okay, so you've got sensors. Where is the receiver, and where would be the computer? So we went through all the offices, all the spaces, and at one end of the building, this tiny cupboard. Okay, there's the receiver. There's the computer, old cathode ray monitor, turned it on, and up comes Windows 2000, and it's like, oh, bloody hell. This hasn't been on for years. So yeah, that's probably what, at least 17 years.
Yeah.
It hadn't been running because nobody knew about it. And that's the problem when people leave, they don't tell anybody what they got.
That's a good answer. 17 years then.
17 years.
So finally then, what's the funniest place you've ever found a logger?
It's strictly speaking, it's not a logger. It's a little bit old school. It's out in Cairo. I've got two actually.
Oh, please.
Out in Cairo with the late great Bob Childs. We were doing a job out there together, and as we're having a walk around, there's this scrap metal dealer just on the street. There's a big pile of old electronics and things, and as we walk past, he looks at the top and goes, "What's that up there?" And obviously the seller that comes out, "What's that? Can we have a look at that up there, please?" And he sort of scrambles up the pile of electronics and pulls out an old chart thermohygrograph.
Wow.
And they're like, "Oh my God, that's worth a fortune." They're like 500 quid, and he's just there, "You want to buy it?" And we're like, "No, thank you." See you later. So that was a good one. Didn't expect to see one of those in a million years in street market in Egypt. And then the other one was actually underneath a snail.
Pardon?
We had a customer. She knows who she is. It had a transmitter, one of the radio transmitters, underneath a snail.
As in a living snail or a model snail?
And the snail had died on top of the transmitter.
Oh no. Oh, I see. Okay.
It's a poor snail just sitting there in a store. Don't know how it got there. Just this little snail shop. Yeah, there was much hilarity and much photoshopping went on with that one. But that's it. Otherwise, normally it's very boring.
Right.
On a wall, above a door.
Normal places.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's put one in like a hippo's mouth or anything like that.
That's a shame.
I know.
So anyone with a large hippo in their museum collection, try and monitor the environmental conditions in the hippo's mouth, potentially. Make Michael happy.
Crocodile, lion. Everybody's got a lion.
Yeah, everyone's got a lion.
Any museum worth their salt's got a lion. Have you got a lion?
We haven't got a lion. Thank you. There might be a lion on a banner somewhere, probably.
Well, there you go. Yeah, have a little competition with everybody. Where's the funniest place you could put your transmitter?
That's an interactive element of the podcast.
Yeah, send in your pictures.
Well, thank you very much after that excellent answer. Thanks very much for speaking to the C word.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you're enjoying the C word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Thanks for listening. We're the C Word, and you've been listening to Jane Henderson, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasson. Join us next time for an episode about dynamic objects. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at the C Word Podcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by demystify, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.